Hi all, let's look at game 5 now. Kasparov playing white, Queen's Gambit again. Queen's Gambit declined with Bishop E7 again, Bishop F4. So Kasparov has a small advantage at the opening. Karpov decides to capture on C4. Doesn't matter about the tempo, not waiting for Bishop D3, because he's going to play A6 and that's potentially going to win a tempo anyway, if he's going to get his Bishop to B7. Kasparov played Bishop D3 now. And here actually, Karpov didn't play the immediate B5, rather he played Bishop D6. Maybe there's nothing wrong with B5 and Bishop B7, or I don't know, maybe he was concerned about E4 from white being potentially unpleasant. Although D4 would drop there, Knight E2, I don't know. So he played actually Bishop D6, a bit of a strange move. So Bishop G5, and now H6. So it's created a weakness potentially around his king, but it's not that exploitable at the moment. Knight Bd7, Knight F3, and the bishop goes back to E7. So is Karpov going to play Knight D5 to try and exchange off bishops, or is he going to just try and free the position with C5? There's a choice of plans available. He in fact chooses C5. After DC, Knight takes C5. The queens are coming off, but white retains a nagging advantage based mainly on the superiority of this bishop over its counterpart. So queen takes D1, rook takes D1. Now rook E8, and the problem with this bishop is really emphasised and underlined now by Kasparov. He plays knight E5. Karpov reacts with B5, so potentially it's going to go to B7. But now there's this pouncing move, knight C6. So Karpov does something about that. He doesn't want to lose his dark square bishop at the moment, and he doesn't mind white losing the dark square bishop. He's really going to double the pawns, because he's got an idea that maybe F3 E4, the bishop can be redeployed on this diagonal, as we'll see later. So he doesn't really want to give Karpov the double pawns. It increases the dynamism for the black pieces, really, and maybe, you know, even there'll be E5 and the bishop can even come out, like, you know, later. So what he does is F3. He preserves his dark square bishop, and black reacts with G5. So why do you think Karpov is potentially weakening himself? Well, the queens are off, so it's less exploitable, these weaknesses around the king. That's the first thing to note. The other thing to note is that Karpov, I believe, wants to have the choice of either Bishop B7 or Bishop D7. So at the moment, Bishop D7 would have been impossible because of Bishop takes F6 and B4. So the knight moves, then Rook takes D7. So by kicking that bishop, now he's facilitating his next move. So that's Bishop D7. So there's no immediate tactical disaster now with B4 or anything like that, or Knight E5 first. Pardon me. So basically, there's a small advantage for white. He plays Knight E5. And the bishop actually goes back. So a bit of a seesaw game so far with both bishops and the bishop movements in general. E4 liberating the position a bit for this bishop on that diagonal, but at the same time hemming in the light square bishop a little more. So Karpov actually plays B4, and this provides quite a commitment, especially for the ending. If, you know, white's king's going to be centralised in the ending, these pawns are potential liabilities the further they are up here. But on the upside of that, you know, there's potential for it to generate a dangerous passed pawn sometimes. But it's 2 against 2 on this side of the board. So overall, I think it's a bit of a controversial decision, this B4, as we'll see later in this game. So Knight E2, Knight CD7. And here, instead of like the routine exchange of knights, by the way, I'm also wondering, is Rook takes C8 on here and Knight takes D7? Rook takes C8, there's Knight takes C5. So black's not losing a piece tactically. So what Kasparov did was try and pick up the dark square bishop again. He played the menacing move Knight C4. Remember that Karpov just played B4. He'd weakened that C4 square just earlier. So Kasparov is really, you know, getting to grips with black's weaknesses. You know, fully exploiting them for pouncing with his knights. So now Knight D6, another pouncing move, getting that dark squared bishop. And look at that dark squared bishop now. This is a concrete, tangible advantage. But yeah, let's go easy on both players. It is 5-minute chess. I know it's with a 2-second increment, but 2 seconds is not that much time, you know, for every move you play just to get 2 seconds. It's still a very fast-paced 5-minute game in effect. So Knight D4, bishop a6. Finally, the bishop is not stuck on the first rank. Bishop g3. So Kasparov doesn't mind apparently knight d3. I think if bishop takes, maybe in that position there might be knight takes e6. I'm not sure actually, because then bishop e4 it gets a bit messy. But anyway, Karpov didn't fancy knight d3. He didn't want to create too many tactical liabilities. He just simply supported his knight on e5, and it looks good because this pawn's actually doing something. It's preventing f4, so he's got a good knight on e5. He's simply supporting. But Kasparov undermines this all now with knight c6, and in the process he exchanges down into an endgame where his nagging advantage, especially with this tactical move, his nagging advantage is really still there. So whatever way black takes, he's ending up with a small disadvantage. If he takes with the knight, rook takes d7. He took with the rook, so Kasparov took the rook, and then he took on d7. So we're getting a more simplified ending. Now rook c8. So potentially Karpov, may just move the knight back even to the first rank just to get the rook activated. Kasparov stopped all this action on the c file by simply playing rook c7, and there's not much choice in this position. I think if rook d8 takes, check, king f2, well the rook's hanging, the rook's attacking the bishop in that line, so the rooks have been forcibly exchanged off here in effect. Karpov has no time for rook d8, so he takes, and now this ending, the two bishops versus the bishop and knight, remember these pawns are liabilities, so if the king's going to go up there, this is dangerous for the black queenside pawns. So the king starts marching towards the centre. Now f6. Now bishop c2, and this bishop is prepared to go into the light squares as needed, say a4. So king d7, bishop b6, bishop c4, so trying to fix the white pawn on a2. If b3, well that was played. Now there's a potential liability if the knight ever reached c3, it would be attacking a2 and it would be difficult to defend even with the light square bishop, but that takes all time, so in practice it's not really an exploitable weakness. So g3. Kasparov's plan, if he gets in f4, he's going to try and put more pressure on black's pawn structure in general and maybe fix some of the black pawns. So king c8, f4. Now let's see, if Karpov had taken, then king takes, and the king can reroute to attack this pawn. So Karpov has got to keep solid here to avoid a king invasion, to avoid any isolated pawn or king path for the white king. He plays actually h5. And now Kasparov decides to fix that h-pawn by playing h4. So that pawn's fixed. But can this bishop actually exploit it with bishop d1? Well, Karpov, perhaps concerned about that, just plays g4. So in theory he's locked his pawns into safety though. So this light square bishop can't get to this one. If e5 trying to get to g6, then maybe just f5 locking that bishop out of that diagonal. So anyway, so bishop c5 was played. And after king b7, now bishop f8. So this bishop's a bit of a nuisance. If the knight ever moves, then bishop e7, and that's going to be really dangerous for the f6 pawn, which won't be able to advance because of this pressure on f5 at the moment. So knight b8, now bishop e7. The knight's being tied very passively by this bishop, and we're going to see something quite beautiful in this ending. Kasparov is ready to lose his bishop pair because he believes in the superiority now of his dark square bishop against the knight. And we're going to see in this ending there's a fantastic square for the dark square bishop, which puts pressure simultaneously on both sides of the board of black's position. This pawn and this pawn are both on dark squares, so represent a liability because white has that dark square bishop. So king c4, and now the king is also ready to pounce to d5 if given a chance. And that might actually, from being a theoretical possibility, be a practical possibility. If white ever gets in f5 and this pawn ever moves forward, then the king will be able to penetrate to d5. But at the moment, black has a check to kick the king to d4, but still there's this constant threat now of f5 and king d5 in this ending. The knight has to go back to protect f6, and now bishop d8. And now look at this. Can the king hold a5? Can the knight hold f6? This mighty bishop on d8, right at the first, row of black's position is doing some quite serious damage in this position. After king b5, now comes f5 to invade with the white king. So e takes, and look, the white king has now a path into the black position finally, d5 and e6. So if he can win f6, this f pawn will be winning the game. Karpov can only spectate. Now, after a4, I think it's a totally forced win after bishop e7. a3 is played. Now the king marches forward because Karpov couldn't stop king d5 because the bishop is actually attacking b4. And the knight can't help because of bishop f6. Well, maybe takes first, check, then bishop f6. So a3, king d5, and it's clearly winning for white now because this f pawn is much faster than black's opportunities to do something to try and get this pawn queening. Knight d3, bishop d4, just unblocking the pawn. Knight c1, now f6, and here either Karpov resigned or he lost on time, but it does seem to be a completely lost position now. This pawn's far too quick. I hope you enjoyed that ending. There were some instructive points. The bishop was very nice on d8, I thought. I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.